When choosing to study a subject at university, some people choose or pursue a degree that they think they'll enjoy, while others study something that will help them to get their dream job. I relate more to the former type. I studied computer engineering in university simply because it seemed interesting to me. I had little to no prior experience in coding and thought that this degree would simply teach me how to code. I was very naive and never thought about the career aspects that a computing degree would actually bring to me, or what I wanted to become after I graduated. This video is not going to be about my degree or what I do as a software engineer, but somewhere in the middle. With a computing degree, I could have technically become a hardware engineer, or a communications engineer, or a database administrator, but I've now ended up as a software engineer. So I'm going to be discussing the steps I took to now pursue software engineering full-time, regardless if you're a university student or learning to pursue a career in software engineering by yourself. I hope you find my steps and some of the tips I have useful. I've broken this down into two simple sections: gaining skills and then practicing them. Let's talk about what I mean by gaining the skills first, and what exactly are the skills that I'm referring to. When I was in year 1 of university, I most definitely had no idea what were the steps it took to become a software engineer, or what were the skills required even. And of course, like every career, there are technical aspects to software engineering and also the soft skills that a software engineer should have. But I'll just focus on the technical parts of things here, and the skills that I mentioned here will be the basic skills, or the more essential ones that I think are very important to at least get started off in this career. So now when I look back after 2 years of full-time software engineering experience, I think the two skill sets that I definitely required before I could become a full-time software engineer was first, knowing how to code, and second, to be aware of software-specific knowledge. This can consist of understanding frameworks, knowing what are the front-end frameworks, knowing what are the back-end frameworks, as well as how a system is architected. It could also be as simple as understanding what a front-end engineer does versus what a back-end engineer does. Knowing these things would be useful to get started off into software engineering. So if you're very new to this and you want to know where to start, I would definitely say start off with learning how to code first. That's the basic. And then to gain knowledge about some of the tools that software engineers use, as well as understanding how the software is actually built and architected. So how did I learn to code? Studying a computing degree definitely helped with this aspect. I had the benefit of a well-structured curriculum spread across my semesters, where I would learn the basics and the fundamentals of coding first, and then later be given the opportunity to try these out or practice this in other modules in the future. My learnings in university definitely focused more on the fundamentals and concepts rather than the languages that the university taught me. So I'm not going to go into detail about how you should learn to code or what language you should start off with. I think that's completely up to you. But I do want to share some of the fundamentals or concepts that I had learned in my first 2 years of university, which now, in hindsight, I think do help me to become a software engineer and have helped me to get my full-time job. So the first concept is definitely data types, like understanding data types. This is as simple as integers, strings, floats, just knowing what they are, when you should use them, how different languages use them. So second will be data structures. This can be arrays, linked lists, queues, stack. While I don't use all of the data structures every single day, like I've never actually implemented a linked list in my job as a software engineer before. But I think knowing the fundamentals around them and knowing how they can be used in real world scenarios is actually very useful. For example, I may not be implementing queues every single day, but in the life of a software engineer, or usually the way software systems are architected, you do tend to have to use message queues to allow asynchronous processing. An example of a message queue that's used quite commonly is SQS. So knowing how simple things like this work is useful to understand other tools out there. So the third concept is algorithms. I know people usually group up data structures and algorithms together, but I did want to split it up because, according to me, at least in my experience as a software engineer, data structures holds more importance than learning or memorizing all of the algorithms out there. In fact, I don't think I necessarily use a lot of the algorithms that I learned in university in my life as a software engineer. But having said that, I think it was definitely useful for me to have been taught these algorithms, such as searching or sorting. These are definitely super important for interviews. I think it's also important to understand which sorting algorithm or which search algorithm to use when. So although you don't need to implement the sort function by yourself nowadays, because most languages already have an inbuilt library function that does sorting for them. But I do believe that it's quite important to understand the actual algorithm that these underlying library functions actually use to just make sure that your code is actually as optimized as possible. Talking about optimization, the fourth concept that I do want to point out is understanding how to determine time complexity and space complexity as well. Not only is this really important for coding interviews, because a lot of interviewers that I've experienced do tend to ask you what is the time complexity of the code that you've written, or what is the space complexity. So knowing how to determine this is very, very important. And understanding this has definitely helped me to become a software engineer. So this whole process of knowing how to determine time complexity that I learned in university has actually helped me to become a software engineer and ensure that I keep myself in check and all of the processes or of the functions, classes that I write are as optimized as possible. Okay, so these few concepts that I mentioned are actually really simple and basic things that one often learns when they learn to code, but I thought naming them would be useful, especially if you're just starting off, as being familiar with these and understanding all of these concepts thoroughly did help me to become a software engineer eventually, and also helped me get past my internships. If we go back, I had mentioned 2 technical skills that I thought were useful to become a software engineer: to learn to code, which I already talked about, and second, to understand software developmental tools and just the basic knowledge about it. So how did I learn the second part of it? While some people often learn this at university itself or at boot camps, or just read about it by themselves online, I actually picked up software developmental tools and knowledge around it at my first internship. This sort of also aligns with my second section, which is to practice the skills that I picked up. Practicing the skills can actually be done by personal projects like learning to do it by yourself, or internships like what I tried. I also did attempt personal projects, or like trying to create my own full stack app or even a web app from scratch. But I realized there were so many technologies out there that I had no idea which one to actually try, or what was the starting point, where I should learn to learn. And I didn't even know what I didn't know. So instead of being so confused, I decided to just apply for my first internship and see what it felt like to be a software engineering intern. This internship also helped me to practice all of the coding skills that I had learned and see how I can apply them to the case of a software engineer. I wouldn't say learning software developmental tools at an internship, or not knowing anything about it and learning everything from scratch at your first internship, is the best way to go about it, but that's what I did. So how did I even get my first internship without knowing anything about software development? This was because when interviewing for this internship, the interviewer only expected me to know how to code. Because I think I was just a year 2 student at university, they didn't expect me to be familiar with all of the software tools out there or even know how to use them. The interviewer only tested my coding skills. They asked me things about data structures and algorithms that I mentioned earlier, and knowing that I was familiar with them was sufficient. I was not expected to be aware of frameworks or even other software developmental tools. This was the process for me. I cannot guarantee it will be the same for all companies. I also won't go into detail about what I did at the internship. I've already covered that in another video. I have to say I was very fortunate to have mentors who were helping me and my fellow intern with the questions that we had. And because me and the other intern were also super new to this, we were also given the leeway to get familiar with the frameworks ourselves, take time off to do some readings, and just understand how things work, as well as be open to asking questions if we have any. Being an intern is definitely different from being a full-time employee, because I felt that at that particular internship, I was not given full-fledged responsibility of the core system. We were still given the freedom to learn and to also make mistakes, to learn from mistakes and understand the technologies that they use, the frameworks that I should be familiar with if I do want to take the software engineering route in the future. Because of that, according to me, 3 months of internship is somewhat equivalent to a semester in university in terms of what I think I had managed to learn and the skills I was able to pick up. So if you are considering to become a software engineer or not so sure about it, I would definitely recommend to secure an internship if possible, because I think that's really the best place for you to practice your skills, gain the skills, and understand if this is actually what you want to do. The tech industry does have a lot of different pathways that you can take. So I was a bit confused if software engineering is actually what I want to do. The internship also helped me to realize that doing this was so fun and enjoyable, and that this is what I wanted to spend my time doing. But I don't think anyone's going to give you a software engineering internship if you don't even know how to code. So definitely learn that first. You can go back to the 5 concepts I mentioned, which I think are very useful to know how to code. And with that, you might be able to apply for your first internship, where just like me, you can pick up the software developmental tools that companies often use, or just understand the life cycle of a software engineer, or even the life cycle of a developmental team. It would also be good if, unlike me, you did read up on these tools by yourself and just be aware of some frameworks that are out there. So to summarize, I basically gained the skills at university and my internship. I practiced the skills at my internship, and I figured out that this is actually what I wanted to do as a full-time job. So that's how I became a software engineer. To be honest, this whole gaining the skills and practicing the skills process has never really stopped for me ever since, because being a software engineer, I've realized that there's so many new technologies that just keep on popping up, and it just seems like there's so many things out there to learn and to continuously grow. If I join a new company, they would definitely be using new technologies that I might not even have heard of. So that's where I need to continuously gain these skills and also practice them. And that's also what makes it fun and not mundane, because it feels like you're always going to be learning something new. You're always going to be growing, not only as a person, but also as an engineer. And that's quite fun in its own self. So I hope you found this useful. And I'm sorry this is a bit all over the place. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have in the comments below. With that being said, thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.